Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of the African Diaspora. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Manager here at the museum. Thank you for joining us for today's activation and artist talk in celebration of the exhibition that you're surrounded by called The Meeting Place by Zekarias Musele Thompson. In The Meeting Place, Thompson invites us into their multidisciplinary exploration of sound, landscapes, body, and movement. Integrating elements of photography, oil painting, and musical composition, Thompson maps the ancestral and the contemporary, the personal and the epochal. This exhibition is part of MoAD's Emerging Artists program and is curated by Kijo Lee, our Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs, and will be on view here at MoAD through September 1st. The Emerging Artists program is made possible by the generous support of the Institute for Museum and Library Services, Karen Jenkins Johnson and Kevin Johnson, the West Ridge Foundation, and Bernard Osher Foundation. Today's program will feature a live musical performance by Zekarias Musele Thompson and their ensemble, followed by an artist talk with Zekarias and James Gordon Williams, Assistant Professor of Composition at UC Santa Cruz Music Department. To begin, I would like to introduce the Meeting Place Ensemble. We have Phillip Laurent on drums, Benjamin Rodgers on synthesizers, Zack Parinella on 16mm film loops, Cory Todd on bass, and Zekarias Musele Thompson on alto saxophone and electronics, synthesizers, and vocals. Join me in welcoming the ensemble.
like to apply in its calculations the fact that sometimes the results are coming from repetitive actions that have not shifted enough. So we might be doing the same thing, getting similar results, and then predicting a similar result from the same thing we did before. Fallacious. And the solution, of course, is to do a different thing. Which means we must allow ego and time to talk to itself, particularly as it easily overpowers the child voice with that teenage determination to get the last word in about shit you don't actually know much about. Pretty funny if you ask me. So okay, cool. It's a process. Crash past the light cone of resentment into a field. The meadow even.
By great sound.
by that little laughter. Thank you so much for being here, y'all. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, let's do.
I guess, once again, Cory on the bass and the drum program. Ben on the MS-20, the synthesizer. Phillip on the drums. Zack on the 16mm film. And I'm Zekarias. I guess I'll be talking. So.
All right, well, I'm going to officially introduce our guests before we get into the conversation. It's my honor to introduce Zekarias Musele Thompson, who is an artist based in Oakland and Reykjavik, Iceland, often working in sonic composition, mark making, photography, collaborative group practice and performance, and writing. Their practice is concerned with humanity's conceptual and emotional organizational structures and how we bring them into material form. They are an instigator of the Musele Project, a sound, image, performance, and facilitation practice that encourages deep, empathetic listening. And they are also a co-founder of Working Name Studios, a collectively owned and organized arts institution with the mission of building institutional stability and equity for underrepresented creative practices, ideas, and people. They are currently an MFA candidate at the Department of Art Practice at UC Berkeley. Yes, round of applause. And joining them is James Gordon Williams, a transdisciplinary composer, pianist, and cultural theorist. He's the author of Crossing Bar Lines, The Politics and Practices of Black Musical Space. And he is an assistant professor of composition at UC Santa Cruz Music Department, an affiliate faculty member in the Visualizing Abolition Certificate Program and the History of Consciousness Program. He holds a PhD in Integrative Studies, Music, from the University of California, San Diego. Join me in welcoming our guests.
So, Zekarias, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have to be honest with you. I don't really want to talk. I wanted to hear more. I mean, it was such an amazing, immersive experience, and I loved it. So, thank you for that beautiful performance.
Thank you so much.
So, I'd like to talk about what I just heard, and then perhaps go into other questions related to the discourses you've been swimming around relative to Robert Farris Thompson, Simon Najami, and people like that you've quoted in your work. So I couldn't help but hear a feeling of joy from that opening alto saxophone riff that you were playing. And the way that it was building up layer by layer through the drum programming, I guess you mentioned the MS synthesizer Korg,
Yeah, the
atmospheric drumming relative to the playing on cymbals. So what I was thinking about when I was listening to that, I was thinking about the looping that was happening. But sometimes looping can sound like really mechanical and not organic. I felt the opposite of that in terms of your music. There was the sort of the hand drum sound, I guess, in the drum programming. Boom, 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 like 4/8 notes and 2/4 notes. And that was very prominent. But then there was the kind of a sonic opacity, if you will. And we're going to come back to this theme of opacity in your work. But talk to us about your process in terms of the layering and what you're trying to communicate via to the conflation of the soundscape and the landscape, in your work we see here, but also in the images that we saw connected to your sound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess there is, I have myself, and I often see a propensity that is kind of very pervasive in our culture, that is to move very quickly through a space, like extract the information that you can get in that one pass, and then you'll synthesize it in the ways that you do. And I was finding that it feels very important to keep looking or keep listening to something that's happening and find all the nuances that you can find within it, or just recognize that they are going to continue. So the looping is a lot about like hearing something that feels, say, joyous, like that line, mm-hmm. that really kind of something like really pretty short that can give that impression or that feeling, or that I'm like dealing with what is that moment of joy here amidst all of these like intense moments of like tension at the very least, for sure. Yeah. And that's there. What else is there? Uh-huh. And then in order to kind of understand how they're refracting with each other, just place them together and see how they continue to interact.
Yeah, it's wonderful. You know, I was watching a little bit of the Olympics, and you can't watch the Olympics without seeing an artificial intelligence commercial. And as I was driving into town from Santa Cruz, you saw various advertisements for artificial intelligence. And of course, this is sort of predicated on an instantaneous response via algorithms, right? And your music is doing something that is the opposite. It's about reflection and meditation. And I think I even wrote down here, drone-like lingering, mm-hmm. right? So the lingering in a space which reflects your mission of a kind of spatiality that's complex. So you chanted this thing, this sentence, sounded by great sound. Could you unpack that for us a little bit when you talk about, what do you mean when you say sounded by great sound?
Thank you for that question. Sounded by great sound, I think, feels to me like a chant for us to recognize and be in the duration of the interaction that is sound, like what we call sound, which is air pressure waves that are coming into our eardrums. Mm-hmm. And then you have a number of small apparatuses that change them into electrical signals, and then mm-hmm. those sound different, all of these things. It's really for that mm-hmm. to be held present with us always.
And of course, I was connecting that idea to, please correct me if I'm wrong, mm-hmm. I think you said the solution, of course, is to do a different thing, mm-hmm. which is the whole sort of trope, right, through your practice. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to the computer here, and I'll be playing some things, but I wanted you to talk about your process for choosing sites for making field recordings that eventually conflate this landscape and soundscape that you're putting together, and sort of connect that to your study of, I believe it's Mbuti design. Mm. Mm. I have to say before you speak, I know how hard it is to, after performance, where you are just letting, opening yourself, it's hard to get back into the sort of the register of just normal talking sometimes. So take your time.
Yeah. I think in terms of the field recordings and in terms of, I guess, how I was attempting to locate myself throughout the work that becomes this project, like what we're kind of we're listening to and seeing in front of us, is just like taking notes when the creative impulse comes or something like that, right? So many of the things that are field recordings and the sounds that you will hear if you're in the room while the sounds are playing, which of course is not quite right now, they are me like hearing something in my mind and then being like, okay, let me whistle that, or placing my phone somewhere so that I could hear the outside sounds, like the folks downstairs underneath my studio window. Or maybe saxophones that I played just to play something and then found again later. And I think that it's an attempt to just like, and then those things can be happening anywhere. Like some of those recordings maybe were taken when I was on a walk in like the Adirondacks, like at a lake house, and then maybe there's a picture that is from that moment or from that time frame as well, and then just marking it down basically. And I think that is where I think that locating comes back to mind in terms of the art of the Mbuti people, which I guess the Mbuti people are a group of folks that live in the forest, in what's called the Ituri rainforest in it's like central Democratic Republic of Congo, and they are people that have mostly built their lives like doing like kind of in smaller groups, mostly still hunter-gathering, and they make art whenever it's time to dance on bark cloth, which really consist of these lines that maybe kind of are in parallel at times, or then crossing each other, like kind of sometimes like pretty kind of simple figures that say many, many, many things, and they arrange them in really beautiful ways. And I was thinking a lot about their work when I was making the paintings in this exhibition, for sure. And I think in terms of the locating and the kind of, that feels much like mapping out where have I been? Where have we been?
It's been a real pleasure getting to know your work, admittedly only recently, but it's been a fun journey to explore the discourses that you've been in, and we have a lot of common in terms of what we like, and you've been to the Adirondacks. It sounds like we've been traveling the same places too, but your work is so rich, it's kind of like, I have all these places of entering the conversation, so excuse me as I clumsily traipse through these questions. I'd like to talk about the opacity, the opposite of transparency in your work. Edward Glissant argues that the West's demand for transparency is about hierarchy and reduction of people into categories for the search of absolute truth. He writes that, quote, only by understanding that it is impossible to produce anyone, no matter who, to truth he would not have generated on his own. And later, he writes, we clamor for the right to opacity for everyone. And I was also thinking about Njami's discussion in Africa Remix, contemporary art of a continent, and of the way he discusses the African artist's refusal to explain their work to the viewer, especially those viewers outside of the culture who demand a type of transparency in the creative process. Do you see aspects of your creative process in the same way, refusing to explicate that in the face of Western demand for clarity? In other words, is your exhibition part of this genealogical African aesthetic of silence that seeks to cultivate an undefinable space? It's a long question. Sorry.
Yes.
All right, on to the next one.
Yeah, it's, I think a lot about the moment that we just, like, how the body's kind of structures want to create certain types of hierarchies of understanding, a lot of the times to kind of like create an idea of, shall we say, safety for the material body, right? Mm-hmm. And that gets oftentimes misrepresented and lost track of, and then we get to this place where we think that we are able to predict the future always. And I feel like that is really kind of connected to this desire to kind of illuminate everything, right? We must get there. And I think that is silly. And I'm really interested in all the possible ways of all the possible entryways into something without creating a particular narrative that is so like one-to-one. It's like my narrative that I'm giving you. And of course, like within the context, there is a narrative that exists because I experience these things. But if there are many ways for us to kind of enter into the conversation or enter into space together to then be like, okay, well, what do we have here? Where do we want to go?
Right.
Yeah.
Let's listen a little bit to your piece, First Time for Everything, and then I have a question related to that.
Also, First Time for Everything is also on the wall here, so you can look while you're listening if you'd like.
So that's just a bit First Time for Everything. So in your piece, First Time for Everything, I was thinking about the theme of multi-vocal juxtapositions. I think perhaps juxtaposition is not even the correct word, right? Because that alludes to sort of binarial thinking, right? I see your work connected. So you have a landmass that almost looks like a peninsula with improvised structural patterns. Green and white lines point to a seabird. I think it's a seabird. Various color patterns in blue, magenta, green, yellow represent fields of structured play. And I was thinking of your discussion, we're going back to Thompson again, of how Mbuti design influences your work. Thompson argues that Terry woman design challenges the notion of a teleological linearity which is threaded in male-dominated European modernism. He goes on to write, quote, "Here we are dealing with painting by women who are also architects, choreographers, and composers of rich yodel-inflected singing. Their work provides an alternative canon. It rises not from monumental cities, but from forest, not from the hands of men, but women. The strength and influence of this art establishes a special current in the history of art, a forager aesthetic, all of which defines the rise and achievement of an alternative aesthetics, asymmetric, ordered, unpredictable, vividly alive in the history of world art." You know, today we have words that try to describe the African, or as Georgie Lewis would say, Afrological, multilingual work that has existed for millennia, and which you have inherited. You know, we have these terms that describe the work we do, right? Multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary. But all that sort of just describes what has always existed in the Black aesthetic, right? So how do you see your work existing in this beautiful Afrological genealogy of the foraging aesthetic in this non-siloed world? And then maybe talk about the patterns here as it relates to Terry Mbuti design. And to throw another question at you, I was wondering if you saw your work connected to Julie Meritu in some way.
Yeah, you know, definitely.
In terms of, micrographic drawing, palimpsest blurring, smudging.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the last...
And I can repeat any of the questions.
Yeah, I'll start from the back end. Definitely, I was thinking a lot about Julie Meritu throughout this moment of painting. Big time. And yeah, in terms of kind of that, all of those lineages, I feel very, very much a part of them. And the element that feels, I guess, that's really particularly showing up in this body of work is like an attempt, like going back to the attempt at location, right? Mm-hmm. Or just recognizing where the locations are that are making up this element of this life as the valuable things, because they are just the aspect of creation that I exist within, right? And that's kind of shades out for us all if we kind of wanted to. And yeah, I was really thinking about and being with the way that the lines give direction and give so much information, and about kind of the varied beings that I feel like maybe I encountered in that place that I observed them, right? And also, of course, in terms of like kind of choosing the image, like this image is of a rock that is on a peninsula in kind of the central west of Iceland called Snæfellsnes, and it was such a being to kind of encounter in this space, like kind of on the edge of everything, and then this seabird flew, like it was coming out of its mouth, And I think all of the noticings feel very much like an aspect of those lineages you discuss. Like, oh, here are the things that we notice, and look what they're all doing together.
I want to talk about the way that sound is incorporated into this exhibition. I think that, and I'm going to enter this through Pauline Oliveros, because I've also been listening to some of the music that you say influenced your project or projects. So here goes. I've been spending some time listening to some of the musicians you've listened to when you created your work, such as Pauline Oliveros' Deep Listening, which started the Deep Listening movement. Pauline Oliveros has explained their understanding of the difference between hearing and listening. They wrote, quote, "To hear is the physical means that enables perception. To listen is to give attention to what is perceived, both acoustically and psychologically. In regard to deep listening," end quote. So this is my question. So in regard to deep listening, what were the aesthetic goals relative to the performance you had, just as well as this exhibition? It seems to me that in some ways you would want the viewer/listener to be enveloped in sound. Like, just crank it up, baby, So how do you see that or hear that?
The sound.
Let me ask, how do you envision I suppose your audience, which this is very interactive work, how do you envision them hearing your work in relation to what they're seeing?
In relation to what they're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, when they come in this room, how do you hear sound?
How do you hear sound? Yeah, for sure. Within, I was really interested, particularly when we were kind of trying to set the levels of the sound versus in having you be able to be enveloped in the sound, but also not to the point of you could not necessarily go anywhere else or feel like you were kind of held, right? Just softly enveloped, but fully present in it. Yeah. Always trying to find that balance there.
Yeah, we know how music is often used in society, often to move people from one place to the other, especially if you're in a restaurant. Let's get you out as soon as possible. But you want your music to be welcoming, that lingering sort of meditative space. So Don Cherry's work, Bitter Funeral Beer, which has vocal and instrumental improvisation over a 15-beat cycle, was on that list. How does that influence what happened today or what you recorded, just as an example of an influence on your work?
Don Cherry is, I don't know if everybody knows Don Cherry here, but he's a really very special trumpeter and horn player, and who was very active in the 60s and 70s and kind of what becomes known as as we talk about free jazz. And that moment of kind of the Bitter Funeral Beer band, when he was in Sweden, or he was working with friends in Sweden, but he spent a lot of time in Sweden, kind of developing a practice with collaborators coming in and out that all, and just finding, like really getting deep into various various other cultures' kind of sound making practices, and then bringing that through in improvisational spaces with people. And I think that, like, in terms of like the performance of this, that practice feels very, very present in terms of like most of like the folks that I performed with. We've been doing this piece, like we did it a number of times over the course of the past year, which is one element of like many collaborations that many of us play together like all the time in various formations and iterations of sound making projects and others too. And so it's kind of element of the practice that is really built around like being in community together, figuring out what we want to do, you know, that feels really present.
Yeah, I see that emphasis on community connected to multivocality. It reminds me of something Henry Threadgill, composer, told me once. He talked about stacking different experiences upon your original one. You know, like he talked about some people who sort of stay in their neighborhood where they are, not just physically, right, but mentally. And then there's just sort of stack experiences on top of that. And when you stack different experiences through travel, through exposure to different cultures, you never lose the roots of who you are, you know. And so that just reminded me of this what you were talking about relative to Don Cherry. Of course, we're never talking about a colorblind universality, right? But there is a sort of a human connection. And I'm realizing that's not a question, that's more of a comment. How are we doing? 5 minutes? Okay. So I was reading, your writing related to this exhibition, and you talk about your early encounters with museums, and how you immediately encountered a cultural bias. And you also talk about how your quote-unquote gestural choices and chronological sound and spatial art are about expanding your audience's relationship with their own agency in order for them to determine what holds value for them. Can you explain why you want the audience to participate in this way? What is the emphasis of the audience's agency in your work? And this sort of relates to what we were just talking about relative to community.
The first part of that, there was something about layers. What was it? Yeah, could you? Gestural choices. Now, if we follow like someone like Igor Stravinsky, he makes a binary between what he calls chronological sound and spatial art. Of course, your work, I think, represents a destruction of that kind of binary thinking, and I want to emphasize that. But gestural choices related to encouraging the audience in interaction. We've seen you do it here in the performance, but also just in the space as well. Today is the first time that I've seen this exhibition, so I know we've been setting up. But the agency why is that important to you?
Yeah, the agency is important to me because, well, there was the story about kind of encountering art in the museum, like from when I was younger. I think that I went to the museum and I was seeing portraits of like mostly like aristocratic European men
and some U.S. European men, and like portraits of landscapes, and they would just be there, and I was like, "What? Well, you want me to see this for a very specific reason." It feels like, and just like the creation of like a certain pictorial hierarchy, like was something that I guess I understood, but then was like, "Oh, I don't know about all this art stuff," then, you know, and I think that in terms of the like entering into a space and also entering into like work into this museum, which is like my first time doing such a thing, and it feels very important to me to like try and create a space where we can understand that all of the aspects that make up our life are the things that are of value and should go up on a wall in a museum because we value them. And so, and that feels important to me, I guess, because we have a kind of like economic, cultural, we have many structures, institutional structures, like psychological structures that are kind of built around this idea that we don't have the agency that we have to continue changing the ways that we want to exist in this world. And that narrative has been really prevalent since the course of kind of like the colonial system really got going. But of course there's the before and the after. But yeah, it's not been that long that we have thought that we can't go anywhere else. And I think that the more that we can share in space together and recognize we can do whatever we want, and let's figure it out. I want to be in those rooms. So, yeah.
That sounds like a good entryway for the Q&A.
I think in the interest of transparency, though we were speaking about opacity, I think we ran into that even as we were installing this exhibition. There was an aspect that I, even in my desire to deny that coloniality or to deny that there is a vision of this space or a cleanliness or a professionalism that I want to insist upon, that ran afoul of an aspect of the exhibition. And so I want to put that in here because that is a part of the conversation that we're having. What is the agency of the artist, the agency of the institution, the agency of the curator? Where can they come together? Where does it fall apart? And where is it about what iteration it is, about what space it is, and how those asymmetries shift dependent upon those spaces. So I wanted to bring that into the space with us. Yeah.
Yeah, there was tape that was on the walls. That is another sculpture that is now, as you can see, no longer on the walls because it was falling off maybe quicker than we expected it to, and also. What else was I thinking about?
It was falling off more quickly than we expected it to, and I think, falling off more quickly than we expected it to. So we were running against really basic, practical things like, how do we help the custodians with this? This is important tape. Where do we put it after it falls on the ground? If it's falling on the ground more often than not, what does that mean? But also in thinking about how do you, from a curatorial perspective, how do I invite that agency without it being a push away because it's so defamiliarizing into a certain extent? So it applied too much pressure to that part of my own curatorial practice, I will say. Like, very honestly, it just really did. And so I think that, but I do think that there is something there. I think that it just, yeah.
Which is, I think, really interesting because in a way that that's like that's the way that all of this works, right? And that's the point, yeah, like whether or not, and it's like then whether or not it exists for us to see in this current iteration, like well, one, photos exist of it, which is really fun, and also I think a lot about like that element of kind of flattening. How do you flatten the hierarchies that we have of things that we look at and things that we look at in a space like this, right? And all of the ways in which we can kind of push into those spaces, like tension them, look at them, like laugh at them, like all of that feels important.
Thank you. And it was so beautiful because I came in and out of this space with the tape for 4 days, in and out, thinking, talking, thinking. And so, yes, it gave me also an opportunity that is so precious and important. So I thank you for that, Zekarias.
Hi, Zekarias. You guys talked a little bit about agency and about how you felt like there were a lot of historical paintings that you would look at that felt like they had agency. And I also, just looking at your images, was thinking a lot about like softness and like delicacy in comparison to that. Like maybe some old school bullshit was like way harder and more aggressive than you wanted it to be. And I was just wondering like what you think about delicacy and softness in your work, if you could like speak to that a little bit.
Wow. I think this gets into the opacity part a little bit, and in that most of the pictures that you see on the wall that are photographs that I took are of like moments that are very, very precious to me, or places that feel very, very precious to me, and that like I encountered them, and either there's like some layer of information that like is just inherently important, and then like if we're looking at this picture here, that is a photograph of the Peace and Justice Memorial Park in Montgomery, Alabama, where there is a very, very like important memorializing of the many folks who were lynched throughout the United States. And one of my great-grandfather is on one of those like kind of large rusted boxes there, and at the place there, like hanging from the rafters. It's a very, very, very special place, and if one ever gets the chance to go to Montgomery, Alabama, one should definitely go there. So there's like elements like that are like very deep relations that I got to connect to. And then there are, my parents are right next to them in that diptych there. And then there are like kind of places where I see something happening that feels that's such a vast, long-standing process that I'm kind of just like, okay, how can I be with you or get to see you again, because I don't get to see you very often. And so in that, there's like this like kind of direct window into like that element. And in terms of like kind of the pictorial space of like kind of engaging or interacting or interrupting these moments, I'm like just that inherent process. Well, first the process of creating a reproduction like is already creating a layer of kind of difference outside of the moment of actual encounter and the beingness that was there. And then to kind of, there's a way in which I'm thinking I'm recognizing that by deliberately creating an interruption beyond that, that also like changes both my relationship to the moment that I'm kind of memorializing, and also like is trying to find a balance there. And I think about that interruption, like very much being kind of the heart of this kind of like project that created such dislocation, the colonial project that created such dislocation between bodies, right? And we have to live with it because this is what exists in order to kind of move like through, with, beyond, into like ways of thinking and being and creating organization together. We must work with what we have. And I think that also comes into thinking about the aspects of the softening, where it's like, this is it. Also, how does this thing that maybe feels so big and so heavy and sometimes so sharp and sometimes just so weighty also have its softness? And so I think I'm always kind of trying to see where that is happening too, or let that come through.
Yeah, I think we had spoken about Black geographies on our initial Zoom call, and Black geographies is, of which scholar Catherine McKittrick is one of the main theorists in there, but for sort of the way that enslaved Africans, when they entered the so-called New World, they enter into placelessness because there is no space for them, you know, and how it's important to create new spaces within that placelessness, which we can connect to, like the invisible church, right? You know, creating space right where you are. You know, sometimes I think about like turf dancing in Oakland as part of that, right? So anyway, just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you, Zekarias, and all of those involved in the musical performance. It was really moving. I'm thinking about how your sonic compositions are also very haptic, in the sense that it's effective. Like, I am immediately risen. Like, I feel like I'm being pulled up into a sense of freedom, particularly with this composition earlier today. And so, yeah, I'm curious as I'm moving through the senses of like seeing the images, hearing them, and also being touched by them. I'm curious about what senses you are utilizing in creating those compositions, or any memories that you are evoking to bring that to life.
Well, there is like kind of an origin point of the composition that you heard today, and also which is the title of the composition and also the title of the entire collection of compositions, and also the title of this exhibition, right? And there was a moment I was having that was kind of right in the middle of, it was like July 2020, and I had just, like, I was in Santa Cruz at a beach house, and I had just had an interview for my first interview for a diversity, equity, and inclusion position at the coffee company that I had worked at for the past like 5.5 years or so, that had laid me off and then like hired me back and then eventually hired me for this position. I was having this interview. And so I was kind of both feeling this really fascinating kind of openness because there was a conversation that was happening about the ways in which racialized Black people have been kind of racialized, really, throughout time, and of course, like, tried to be placed in a like false hierarchy of humanness at the bottom, and then you could like be having this conversation, like, hey y'all, this is ridiculous, and also like all of the tension of like observing all the moments where we couldn't have any of that conversation and have people like not look at you like you were crazy, and then being there being like, this is really fascinating, and also like I guess it's time to like have a conversation that needs to be had, and also like for me not take part in an aspect of this dialogue where I would even kind of countenance like being a part of some false hierarchy in that way. So I was feeling a lot of this kind of tension and release that was very, very kind of strong and very joyous and very like, felt like it had to be very repetitive. And then part of the kind of strategy that kind of came about when I kind of first had this experience of like, I'm not like part of the way in which like we're not going to play this game is by saying, okay, well, everything that happens works here. And so if I heard something that felt like it needed to be there, it went. And then if I saw something that felt like it needed to be there, it went. And then you look at what happened there, and then you listen for that creative impulse again, and then mark it down.
We have time for one or two more questions.
I want to ask, since so much of all the work in this in here is sound and image are married, I want to ask, not like I'm sure it's different in each case, but generally I wonder if you could speak to like which comes first, and if there's a moment where you realize things are associated, and just talk about that process a little bit.
So in the instance of this exhibition, the sounds came first, and like first as what you heard, and then that kind of got filled out, and then in terms of the kind of photography, some of the pictures I was taking, not necessarily initially thinking about them being related. And when I was kind of thinking through how I started thinking about how they were related, and would then listen to the compositions, and then like kind of think about what aspects of that specific composition were coming up, like what are the themes that were there, and how are those translating through images as well. So, I mean, I feel like there's maybe a nice example here. I think maybe let's stick with First Time for Everything. First Time for Everything, the composition came about when I had just got these synthesizers that made very particular kind of repeated sounds that were really wild and like very, very synthy and weird. And I kind of made a patch and then played the sounds, and then I really liked what I heard, and so I recorded it, and then I started playing the saxophone over it, right? So it was very much like this encounter, this thing, that's really, I really love how this sounds. Okay, all right, this is something now. And these and also like kind of the kind of feeling in what I think about in that composition, like what's kind of the emotion or kind of narrative of that composition. Like I'm thinking a lot about this kind of first encounter with an open possibility where I really was starting to realize how much could happen and how much was happening and how much it could be like, okay, all right, cool, we're here, let's go. And so that kind of felt really framed when I saw this really wonderful being over there and with the seagull coming out of its mouth. And also at the same time, this kind of the decay that is also happening around us through kind of the modernist project. And there's a way that then this picture of the El Segundo power plant just felt like so framed. It's like, this is also what we do in this space on the beach. And so then I was also thinking about like the way in which like kind of the painting then happened within that space is like thinking about the artists in France, mostly Matisse and Derain and some other folks that were painting in what they called the fauves, which was kind of happened in the person like 1906 was maybe the kind of first forays into like really going from a place of like feeling like you had to represent like the outside world and exactly the colors that it comes to being like, oh, we can do something else. Wow, so cool. And I did think it kind of became this avenue to be like, here, first time, let's just do it, you know? So all of that kind of just repeated itself through that looping structure and creating these new associations. So maybe went kind of like that.
There was one more question over there, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe they changed their mind.
Thanks, Zekarias. I don't know if there's an easy way to answer this, but I was thinking also your reference to Don Cherry, and also brought to mind Nena Cherry and Eagle Eye Cherry as closer to you, right, in some other ways. But I was thinking of what it means with your bio, where it says you live in Oakland and in Reykjavik. And so what it means for you to be held by at least those two places and to hold them, and are you holding them simultaneously? Like, how does that function, right? The two places together.
I think that there are elements of thinking about what it's like to live in Oakland and the kind of feeling of being at kind of the edge of certainly an ideology that spreads, and certainly kind of like a cultural space that is very prevalent in our world, but also very, very particularly held by the kind of the land and the environment that we exist within, like, and just like how it all moves, like the way that the coast is, or the way that the hills are in the east, and then the smell of the eucalyptus and the constant like cool breeze. And I think that I encountered Iceland and I think, in terms of, I'm very interested in the way that we come to be here, like everything comes to be here, but certainly the humans and how we've moved around this space. And part of that narrative is certainly the narrative of the United States and Manifest Destiny. And like Iceland is kind of a particular place where you have a even younger kind of land mass that is constantly in flux through geothermal activity, and also a place where this certain idea of what becomes known as Europeanness is, shall we say, it's really early when it goes to Iceland. And there's something very interesting to me about the cultural spaces that get created in those two places because of those things. And I've been very interested in observing what happens with those land masses and what all the power that they have, and then people that come and have to figure out what to do now, because there's nowhere else to go. You can't expand beyond. You can't get off the island, So that's one of the aspects, and then of course there's the element of having community here that feels really supportive of engaging and working out from these places and making together, and that community also there that feels really akin in those ways too, and just kind of the makeup of coming to a place where you're all right, I'm finding community where we can tackle these questions together. It feels good to be able to be in both places doing that when I can.
Well, I want to thank you, Zekarias, and thank you, Professor Williams. And thank you again to the ensemble. This was a wonderful program. Thank you so much to all of you who've attended and participated. I hope that you continue engaging with the museum and all the work that we're doing, whether that's becoming a member, making a donation, or spreading the word and attending all of our public programs. This is just one of the many events that we do at the museum, so I encourage you to visit our website, moadsf.org, to learn more. I want to specifically highlight that on August 24th, we'll be partnering with Zekarias again. MoAD and SF Jazz are presenting another live performance, which with Zekarias and the Togetherness Ensemble. So please do join us again for that performance. It'll be up in our third floor gallery, so music in more galleries. And lastly, we would love to hear from you. You have QR codes on your chairs as well as the back of the room to share a few thoughts about your experience with this program and what more you'd like to see in the future. Your feedback really helps us best support our communities, so thank you in advance for taking a few moments. And lastly, please continue enjoying the museum. All of our galleries are open until 6. Spend some more time with this exhibition as well as the other incredible exhibitions while you're here. So thank you all.